The Galactic Senate had existed for 10,000 years. It was a place where the most powerful species in the known universe gathered to make decisions that affected trillions of lives across 700 worlds. The chamber itself was enormous, carved from the heart of an ancient asteroid, with seats rising in endless tiers toward a ceiling lost in shadow. The Velthari had ruled this place for as long as anyone could remember. They were beings of living crystal, their bodies catching and refracting light in ways that made them seem both beautiful and cold. They thought in numbers and equations. They felt nothing that could not be measured. Ambassador Zithrin was their voice in the Senate, and he had held that position for 3 centuries. The Kreth were the warriors, massive insectoid creatures with armored bodies and mandibles that could crush steel. They controlled the military forces of the Galactic Alliance. They respected only strength and viewed compassion as a disease of weaker species. The Solani were different. They existed as beings of pure light and sound, drifting through the air like living music. They handled diplomacy because they could read emotions in ways other species could not. But even they kept their distance from others. Trust was a rare thing in the galaxy. On the day the humans arrived, no one paid much attention. Their ship was small and battered, clearly the product of a civilization that had only recently discovered faster than light travel. It limped into the docking bay with scorch marks on its hull and an engine that wheezed and coughed like a dying animal. Captain Daniel Hayes stood at the airlock and took a deep breath. He was 42 years old, with gray at his temples and laugh lines around his eyes. He had commanded fishing boats before he commanded starships. And he still carried himself with the easy confidence of a man who had weathered many storms. Lieutenant Maria Santos stood beside him. She was younger, with sharp eyes that missed nothing and a mind that worked faster than most computers. She had grown up in a small town where everyone knew everyone, and she had never lost the habit of treating strangers like potential friends. The airlock opened. The smell hit them first. The air in the Senate station was recycled and sterile, carrying chemical undertones that made Maria wrinkle her nose. The light was harsh and white, designed for Velthari eyes that saw in frequencies humans could not perceive. A delegation was waiting for them. Ambassador Zithrin stood at the front, his crystal body pulsing with patterns that the human translator struggled to interpret. Behind him stood representatives from a dozen species, all watching the newcomers with expressions ranging from curiosity to contempt. Daniel walked forward and extended his hand. The gesture caused visible confusion. Several species stepped back. A Kreth guard raised its weapon halfway before a Solani diplomat gestured for calm. "It is a greeting," Daniel explained, keeping his hand extended. "Among humans, we touch hands when we meet. It is a sign of friendship and trust." Zithrin studied the offered hand for a long moment. His crystal eyes flickered with calculations. "Physical contact between strangers is not practiced here," he said finally. "It is considered either a threat or an invitation to mate." Daniel laughed. The sound echoed through the chamber, warm and genuine. Several species had never heard laughter before and did not know how to react. "I promise it is neither," Daniel said. "It is simply our way of saying that we are glad to meet you." Zithrin did not take the hand. Instead, he turned and began walking toward the Senate chamber, clearly expecting the humans to follow. Maria leaned close to Daniel as they walked. "That went well," she whispered. "They are afraid," Daniel replied quietly. "They have been alone for so long that they have forgotten what friendship looks like. Can we teach them?" Daniel smiled. "We can try." The Senate hearing was brief and dismissive. The humans were granted a small moon on the outer rim of explored space. Far from any strategic resources or important trade routes, they were given minimal technology assistance and told to report back in 50 years for evaluation. It was, everyone understood, a polite way of telling them to disappear. Daniel accepted the terms with grace. He thanked the Senate for their generosity. He expressed hope for future cooperation. He smiled at everyone, even the Kreth, who looked at him like he was an insect to be crushed, as the human delegation left the chamber. A young Solani drifted close to Maria. Its light flickered with colors that the translator identified as curiosity. Why do you smile? The Solani asked. You have been given nothing. You have been sent away. Your species has been dismissed as irrelevant. Yet you smile. Maria considered the question seriously. Because we are alive, she said finally. Because we are here, in a galaxy full of wonders we never imagined. Because we have been given a chance, even a small one. Where we come from, that is enough reason to smile. The Solani flickered with colors the translator could not identify. You are strange creatures, it said. I guess Maria agreed. We are. The journey to their new moon took 3 weeks. The human colonists spent the time planning and dreaming and arguing about the best way to build a new home. There were 4,000 of them packed into ships that had been designed for half that number. They were farmers and teachers and doctors and engineers. They were parents with young children and elderly people who had volunteered to spend their final years among the stars when they finally reached the moon. They found a barren rock with thin atmosphere and soil that would require years of work to make fertile. The nearest inhabited world was 6 days away at maximum speed. They were, for all practical purposes, alone. Daniel gathered everyone together on the surface, their breath misting in the cold air. This is not what we hoped for, he admitted. This is not the welcome we dreamed of receiving. But it is what we have, and what we have is enough. He pointed toward the stars. Out there are species that have forgotten how to trust. They have forgotten how to help each other. They have forgotten that the universe is not just a place of competition and survival, but also a place of connection and kindness. We are going to remind them how. Someone asked. Daniel smiled. By being ourselves, by helping when we can, by treating everyone we meet as a potential friend, by showing them that there is another way to live. Maria stepped forward. It will not be easy. They will not trust us at first. They will think we want something from them. They will look for the trick, the hidden agenda, the price we expect them to pay. And when they cannot find one? A young man asked. Maria looked at Daniel. He nodded for her to continue. When they cannot find one, she said, they will begin to wonder. They will begin to question everything they thought they knew about how the universe works. And that is when everything will begin to change. The colonists set to work that very day. They built shelters and planted crops. They established schools and hospitals. They created a community based on principles that the galaxy had forgotten: mutual aid, shared resources, unconditional kindness. And they waited. They knew that sooner or later, the galaxy would come to them. Not because they were powerful or wealthy or strategically important, but because curiosity was a universal trait. Someone would want to see how the strange new species was surviving on their barren moon when that day came. The humans would be ready. They would offer the one thing the galaxy had never seen before. They would offer friendship without conditions, and that simple gift would change everything. 3 years passed on the human moon. The colonists worked hard and built well. Their crops grew in soil they had enriched with patience and care. Their children learned and played and grew tall under alien stars. They were happy in a way that confused the occasional visitors who came to observe them. Then the news came from Virath Prime. The Virati were a reptilian species, proud and ancient. Their scales shimmered with colors that indicated mood and status. They had been part of the galactic community for 8,000 years, and in all that time, they had never asked anyone for help. A criminal organization called the Crimson Hand had demanded tribute from them. The Virati had refused. They were warriors by nature and would not bow to threats. So the Crimson Hand had released a plague. It was a terrible weapon, designed by minds that cared nothing for suffering. The infected would first notice small patches of discoloration on their scales. Within days, those patches would spread. The scales would begin to fall away, leaving raw flesh exposed. The blood would slowly turn toxic, poisoning the body from within. Death would come, but not quickly. The disease took weeks to kill, and every moment was agony. Within a month, 2 million Virati were infected. The hospitals were overwhelmed. The healthy fled to other worlds, spreading panic and fear. The Crimson Hand sent a message to the galaxy. This is what happens to those who defy us. The Galactic Senate met in emergency session. Ambassador Zithran spoke first. This is a Virati problem, he said, his crystal body pulsing with cold logic. If we intervene, we set a precedent that will be exploited. Other species will expect us to solve their problems as well. The Kreth commander agreed. We have no ships to spare. Our forces are deployed along the border regions. We cannot weaken our defenses for a disease that poses no threat to us. The Solani ambassador sang a mournful song about the tragedy, but offered no solutions. The other species remained silent. Unwilling to commit resources to a cause that offered no benefit, for 6 days the Senate debated. For 6 days, the Virati died. On the 7th day, the doors of the Senate chamber opened without warning. A small group of humans walked in, led by a woman with gray hair and steady hands. Dr. Patricia Coleman had spent her life healing people. She had worked in war zones and refugee camps and disaster areas. She had seen suffering that would have broken most people. But she had never stopped believing that medicine was an act of hope. "We have a cure," she said. The words fell into the silence like stones into water. Ambassador Zithrin recovered first. "That is impossible. Your species has no knowledge of Virati biology. You have been part of this galaxy for 3 years. You cannot have developed a cure in 7 days."
Patricia smiled.
It was a gentle expression, but there was something in her eyes that made several ambassadors uncomfortable. It was the look of someone who had seen the worst that the universe had to offer and had chosen to respond with compassion anyway. "We did not develop it in 7 days," she said. "We developed it in 4. We spent the other 3 days manufacturing enough doses for everyone who is infected." Commander Samuel Wright stepped forward. He was a tall man with kind eyes and the bearing of someone who had served in military forces but had never lost his humanity. He had volunteered for this mission because he believed that true strength was measured by what you protected, not what you destroyed. "Our ship is already in orbit around Varith Prime," he said. "We have 12,000 volunteers aboard. They are ready to distribute the cure and provide medical care." "Volunteers," the Kreth ambassador repeated. His mandibles clicked in confusion. "These are soldiers." "No," Samuel said. "They are teachers, farmers, engineers, parents. They heard that people were suffering, and they wanted to help." The Solani ambassador drifted closer, her light flickering with colors that indicated deep confusion. "What do you want in return?" Patricia and Samuel looked at each other. They had known this question would come. They had prepared for it. But the answer was still difficult for the galaxy to understand. "Nothing," Patricia said. The words seemed to hang in the air, foreign and impossible. "That is not how things work," Zithrin said slowly. "Every action has a price. Every gift creates a debt. This is the fundamental law of economics and politics." Samuel shook his head. "Not where we come from. We help because people are suffering. We help because we have the ability to ease that suffering. We help because if our positions were reversed, we would hope someone would help us." "But the cost," Zithrin insisted. "The resources, the time. Your species has so little, why would you give it away?" Patricia stepped forward. Her voice was soft but carried through the entire chamber. "Because kindness is not a transaction," she said. "Because compassion is not a debt. Because the measure of a civilization is not how much it accumulates, but how much it gives. We are not rich by your standards. We are not powerful, but we have something that all your wealth and power has not been able to create." "What is that?" the Solani asked. "The ability to see strangers as friends we have not met yet." The Senate fell silent. The humans left without waiting for permission or approval. Their ship, the Hope, descended through the atmosphere of Varith Prime that same day. What followed was something the galaxy had never witnessed. Human doctors worked alongside Virati healers, teaching them how to administer the cure. Human volunteers held the hands of dying patients, offering comfort when medicine was not enough. Human musicians sang songs of hope in hospital corridors. Human children drew pictures for Virati children who were too sick to play. The cure worked. Within days, the infected began to recover. The scales grew back. The blood cleared. The dying were given back their lives. The Virati government offered payment. The humans refused. The Virati offered land on their homeworld. The humans declined. The Virati offered technology, resources, political alliance. The humans said no to all of it. Finally, the eldest Virati matriarch requested a private meeting with Dr. Patricia Coleman. The matriarch was ancient beyond measure. Her scales faded to the color of old bone. She had seen empires rise and fall. She had survived wars and plagues and political upheaval. But she had never encountered anything like the humans. "What do you truly want?" she asked. "No one gives without expecting something in return. This is the nature of intelligent beings." Patricia sat across from her, tired from weeks of work but still radiating warmth. "I want you to remember," she said. "Remember what?" "Remember that when your people were suffering, you were not alone. Remember that strangers came from across the stars to help you. Remember how it felt to receive kindness when you expected nothing." The matriarch was silent for a long moment, and then, she asked. Patricia leaned forward. "And then, someday, when another species is suffering, remember this moment. Remember what we did, and pass it on." The matriarch stared at the human doctor. In all her centuries of life, no one had ever asked her to remember kindness. Tears formed in her ancient eyes. Among Virati, tears were considered a sign of weakness. They were hidden, suppressed, denied, but in that moment, the matriarch did not care about weakness or strength. She wept openly, and the tears carried away something hard and cold that had lived inside her for centuries. "I will remember," she promised. "My people will remember. For as long as we exist, we will remember what the humans did for us." Patricia took the old woman's hand and held it gently. "That is all we ask," she said, and it was enough. The Kreth had always been warriors. It was in their blood, coded into their very genes. They were born to fight, lived to conquer, and died with honor on the battlefield. The galaxy feared them, and the Kreth considered that fear to be the highest form of respect. No one expected them to turn on each other. The civil war began over an insult that had festered for centuries. The Iron Caste and the Stone Caste had competed for dominance since the earliest days of Kreth civilization. They had different philosophies, different traditions, different ideas about what it meant to be Kreth. For thousands of years, they had maintained an uneasy peace. Then a young Iron Caste warrior killed a Stone Caste elder in a dispute over territory. The Stone Caste demanded justice. The Iron Caste refused. Within weeks, the entire Kreth civilization was at war. The battles were brutal and merciless. Kreth did not believe in surrender. They did not take prisoners. They fought until one side was dead, and then they moved on to the next battle. The Galactic Senate declared neutrality. Ambassador Zithrin withdrew all Velthri personnel from Kreth space. The Solani closed their borders and sang songs of mourning. Everyone understood that the Kreth would fight until they had settled their ancient grievance, and there was nothing anyone could do about it. But the war produced something that no one had considered: refugees. The Kreth did not flee from battle. That was known throughout the galaxy. A Kreth warrior would rather die than retreat. This was their way, and it had been their way for 10,000 years. But the children were different. Kreth larvae were helpless. They could not fight. They could not defend themselves. They required constant care and specialized nutrition. In peacetime, they were protected by the entire community. But in war, they were a burden. The Iron Caste made a calculation. Protecting larvae required resources that could be used for fighting. Every warrior assigned to guard the young was a warrior who could not be on the front lines. So they made a decision that they considered logical. They abandoned their children. The Stone Caste made the same calculation and reached the same conclusion. Across Kreth space, millions of larvae were left behind. They were placed in damaged hive structures, on bombed-out worlds, in the cold vacuum of crippled ships. They were left to starve, to freeze, to die alone in the dark. The galaxy watched and did nothing. "Captain." Linda Park received the distress signal on a quiet evening. She was the commander of the human colony ship Mercy, a vessel designed for exploration and humanitarian missions. She had spent most of her career helping people. She had never been able to look away from suffering. Her first officer, Christopher Davis, ran the calculations. Millions of life signs, he reported. All weak. All fading. They are children, Captain. Linda stared at the sensor display for a long moment. The signals were spread across dozens of worlds, scattered throughout a war zone that the Senate had declared off limits. The Senate has forbidden interference in Kreeth internal affairs, Christopher said quietly. If we go in there, we could be arrested. Our colony could face sanctions. Those are children, Linda said. Yes, Captain. They are dying. Yes, Captain. Linda turned to face her crew. They were gathered on the bridge, watching her, waiting for her decision. She saw fear in some faces, determination in others, but she did not see anyone who wanted to turn away. We are going to save them, she said. All of them. Every single one. I will not order anyone to join this mission. It is voluntary only. If you want to stay behind, there will be no shame in that choice. No one moved. Very well, Linda said. Set course for Kreeth space. The Mercy was the first ship to arrive, but it was not the last. Word spread through the human colonies like fire through dry grass. Within days, 26 more ships were on their way, crewed by volunteers who had doctored everything to help. They were not soldiers. They were teachers and farmers and nurses and engineers. They were parents who could not bear the thought of children dying alone. They were grandparents who remembered their own youth and wanted to give that gift to someone else. They flew into a war zone with nothing but hope and determination. The first world they reached was a nightmare. The hive structure had been bombed, leaving the larvae exposed to the thin atmosphere. Most were unconscious. Many were dead. The survivors were clustered together for warmth, their small bodies trembling. Linda was the first to step onto the surface. She walked through the wreckage until she found a group of larvae huddled in a crater. They were tiny things, barely the size of human babies. With soft shells that had not yet hardened into armor, she knelt down and picked one up gently. The larva made a sound, something between a chirp and a whimper. Its small legs moved weakly against her arms. It is okay, Linda whispered. You are safe now. I have got you. The rescue operation lasted for months. Human ships traveled to every world where larvae had been abandoned. They built shelters, developed specialized nutrition formulas, learned to care for a species that had never required care from outsiders. It was not easy. The larvae were fragile. Many died despite the best efforts of human caregivers. Every death was mourned, every loss felt deeply. But the humans did not give up. They saved over 2 million children. When the Kreeth military command learned what was happening, they were furious. Both the Iron Caste and the Stone Caste saw the humans as thieves, stealing Kreeth young for unknown purposes. A joint military force was dispatched to reclaim the larvae. Ambassador Kevin Moore met them at the border of human space. He was a soft-spoken man with a talent for difficult conversations. He had spent his career finding common ground between people who believed they had nothing in common. Return our young, the Iron Caste commander demanded. They belong to us. Kevin shook his head slowly. You abandoned them. You left them to die. They do not belong to you anymore. They are Kreeth, the Stone Caste commander growled. They carry our blood. They are children, Kevin replied. And they will be raised with love and kindness. They will learn that their lives have value. When they are old enough, they may choose to return to you. But that will be their choice, not yours. We'll take them by force. Kevin did not flinch. He looked at the massive warships that surrounded his small diplomatic vessel. He thought about the millions of children behind him, sleeping peacefully for the first time in their lives. You may attack us, he said. You may destroy our ships and burn our colonies. But consider this first. Every species in this galaxy is watching right now. They have seen you abandon your children. They have seen us save them. History will remember what happens next. The Kreth commanders exchanged looks. They were warriors, bred for battle, trained to see combat as the solution to every problem. But they were not stupid. You cannot raise Kreth children, the Ironcast commander said finally. You do not understand our ways? Then teach us, Kevin offered. Send advisors. Help us understand what your children need. We are not trying to make them human. We are trying to keep them alive. The silence stretched for a long moment. Finally, the Stonecast commander made a sound that the translator could not fully interpret. It was something like a laugh, but heavier, sadder. You are strange creatures, she said. You fly into a war zone to save children that are not your own. You offer to learn our ways so that you can raise our young properly. You do not demand payment or revenge or territory. We do not want any of those things, Kevin said. What do you want? Kevin thought about the question seriously. He thought about the children sleeping in human nurseries, growing stronger every day. He thought about the future they might have, the choices they might make, the people they might become. We want them to know that they were worth saving, he said. We want them to grow up knowing that when they needed help, someone came. We want them to learn that the universe is not only cruel, that there is also kindness and compassion and love. The Kreth commander stared at him for a long moment. Our children will not be the same, she said. If they grow up with humans, they will learn human values. They will be changed. Yes, Kevin agreed. They will? And you believe this is a good thing? Kevin smiled. It was the same smile that Captain Daniel Hayes had worn when he first extended his hand in the Senate chamber years ago. I believe that every child deserves a chance, he said. I believe that love can heal wounds that war creates. I believe that the future does not have to look like the past. The Kreth fleet did not attack. The children grew up in human communities. They played with human children. They learned human values. And when they came of age, many chose to return to Kreth space. They brought something with them that had never existed in Kreth society before. They brought hope for 10,000 years. The Velthari had controlled the economy of the galaxy. They owned the trading stations, set the shipping rates, and determined who could participate in interstellar commerce. Species that could pay their fees prospered. Species that could not were left behind. Theta Station was the heart of this system. It sat at the intersection of 12 major shipping lanes, a massive structure that processed more trade in a single day than most worlds saw in a year. The docking fees alone could bankrupt a small civilization. The Velthari liked it that way, Ambassador. Zithrin had built his career on the principle that economic dependence was the most reliable form of control. Species that relied on Velthari infrastructure could not afford to oppose Velthari interests. It was a system that had worked flawlessly for millennia. Then the humans built Unity Hub. It took them 10 years. They pooled resources from every human colony, called in favors from the Verati and the reformed Kreth, and constructed a station that rivaled Theta in size and capability. But that was not what made Unity Hub different. The fees at Unity Hub were a fraction of what the Velthari charged. The services were exceptional. And there was something else, something that had never existed in galactic commerce before. The humans helped other species build their own ships. Chief Engineer Rosa Martinez ran the shipyard with a philosophy that baffled everyone who heard it. She was a small woman with calloused hands and oil stains on her clothes. She had built her first engine at the age of 12 and had never stopped learning since. If you give someone a ship, they can trade for a generation, she explained to a delegation of young Solani. If you teach them to build ships, they can trade forever. The Solani had always depended on other species for transportation, their Bodhi. E's were made of light and sound, which made physical construction difficult. They had accepted this limitation as an unchangeable fact of their existence. Rosa did not accept it. She spent 3 years developing construction techniques adapted to Solani physiology. She invented tools that responded to light patterns. She designed assembly systems that could be operated through harmonic resonance. She trained Solani engineers, patiently correcting mistakes and celebrating successes. When the first Solani-built ship launched from Unity Hub, the entire species wept tears of light, Ambassador Alawan. The Solani representative who had first questioned human motives years ago drifted close to Rosa as the ship disappeared into the stars. "I do not understand," Alawan said. "You have given us knowledge that took your species centuries to develop. You have spent years training our engineers. You have invested resources that could have made you wealthy beyond measure. Why?" Rosa wiped her hands on her work clothes and thought about the question. "When I was young," she said, "my grandmother taught me to cook. She did not charge me for the lessons. She did not demand that I pay her back. She taught me because she wanted me to be able to feed myself and my family. That is a relationship between family members," Ilawan pointed out. "We are not your family," Rosa smiled. "Not yet, but we would like to be." Word spread across the galaxy. Species that had been locked out of interstellar trade for generations came to Unity Hub. The humans helped them all. They taught shipbuilding to the Morthani, navigation to the Kelroth, engine maintenance to the Solani, cargo management to a dozen other species that had never been able to afford their own vessels. The Velthari watched their economic empire crumble. Ambassador Zithran requested an emergency meeting with the human delegation. He arrived at Unity Hub in a ship that cost more than most species earned in a century, accompanied by advisors and guards and analysts who had been trying to understand what the humans were doing for years. Human Ambassador Nicole Green met him in a conference room that was comfortable but not luxurious. She was a woman with silver hair and a diplomatic smile that had disarmed countless opponents over her long career. "You are destroying the Galactic Order," Zithran accused. Nicole nodded thoughtfully. "Yes, I suppose we are. You are undermining systems that have maintained stability for 10,000 years.
Ow.
Those systems maintain stability for some," Nicole agreed. "For others, they maintained poverty and dependence. We believe there is a better way." Zithran leaned forward, his crystal body pulsing with frustrated energy. "You cannot simply give everything away. Economics requires scarcity. Trade requires imbalance. Without these principles, the entire system collapses. Perhaps the system needed to collapse. What will you replace it with? Chaos? Every species competing for the same resources? War?" Nicole shook her head. "Cooperation. Mutual benefit. A galaxy where success is not measured by how much you have taken from others, but by how much you have helped others succeed." "That is naive," Zithran said flatly. "Is it?" Nicole gestured toward the window, where dozens of ships from dozens of species were docking and departing. "Look at them. The Verati are trading with the Kreth. The Solani are building their own fleet. Species that were isolated for millennia are now part of a community. There is more trade happening here than ever happened at Theta Station. But you are not profiting from it." "Profit is not our goal." Zithran stared at her. In all his centuries of experience, he had never encountered a species that genuinely did not want profit. He had seen species that claimed not to want profit while secretly accumulating wealth. He had seen species that traded one form of currency for another, but genuine, unconditional generosity was outside his understanding. "What is your goal?" he asked finally. Nicole stood and walked to the window. She watched the ships coming and going, carrying goods and people and ideas across the vastness of space. "When I was a child," she said, "my mother told me a story about a garden. In this garden, everyone grew their own vegetables. One year, a drought came and some families had nothing to eat. The families with larger gardens could have hoarded their vegetables. They could have charged high prices to the hungry. Instead, they shared. And then they had less for themselves," Zithran said. "Yes, but because they shared, everyone survived. And the next year, when their crops failed, the families they had helped shared with them in return. The garden became a community instead of a collection of competitors." "A pleasant story. But the galaxy is not a garden." Nicole turned to face him. "It could be. It should be. We have the technology to feed every species, to shelter every world, to ensure that no one suffers from scarcity. The only reason anyone goes without is because others hoard more than they need. That is the nature of intelligent beings," Nicole said firmly. "It is the nature of beings who have been taught that scarcity is inevitable. We are teaching a different lesson." We are showing the galaxy that abundance is possible when everyone works together." Zithran was silent for a long moment. He had come to Unity Hub expecting to negotiate, to threaten, to find some weakness he could exploit. Instead, he had found something he did not know how to fight. "Your subjects will eventually demand their independence," he said. "The species you are helping will turn against you when they are strong enough." "They are not our subjects," Nicole replied. "They are our partners, and we hope they do become strong enough to stand on their own. That is the entire point. And when they no longer need you," Nicole smiled, "then we will have succeeded." Zithran left Unity Hub without achieving any of his objectives. His ship passed through a docking bay filled with vessels from a dozen species, all working together, all helping each other, all proving that another way was possible. In the years that followed, the Velthari economic empire did not collapse in a single dramatic moment. It faded slowly as species chose cooperation over exploitation, as Unity Hub welcomed all who sought fair trade. As the galaxy began to transform, some Velthari adapted to the new reality. They learned new skills, found new purposes, joined the community that was forming around human values. Others clung to the old ways, watching their wealth and power diminish, unable to understand why their ancient systems were failing. And in the workshops and shipyards of Unity Hub, Rosa Martinez continued to teach anyone who wanted to learn. "Knowledge is not meant to be hoarded," she told her students. "It is meant to be shared. Every person you teach makes the whole galaxy stronger. Every skill you pass on creates new possibilities." Her students listened, they learned, and they went out into the galaxy to teach others. The ripples spread outward, touching world after world, species after species. The economic miracle of Unity Hub was not about money or trade or resources. It was about connection. And it was only the beginning. 100 years had passed since the battered human ship had limped into the Galactic Senate docking bay. 100 years since Captain Daniel Hayes had extended his hand in friendship and been met with confusion and contempt. 100 years since the humans had been dismissed as irrelevant, primitives and sent to a barren moon at the edge of known space. The galaxy had changed. The Senate chamber was full for the first time in living memory. Every species had sent representatives to mark the anniversary. They filled the endless tiers of seats, a kaleidoscope of forms and colors and sounds that would have seemed impossible a century ago. The Akarati delegation sat near the front. Their scales shimmered with colors of respect and gratitude. They had not forgotten the plague or the humans who had saved them. Every year, they sent young Virati to study human medicine, to learn the compassion that had been freely given to their ancestors. Beside them sat the reformed Kreth. They were different from their warrior ancestors. They still had the armored bodies and powerful mandibles, but something in their eyes had changed. Among them was a female named Kathrak, who had been saved from a bombed-out world as a larva and raised by human parents. She had returned to Kreth space as an adult, and had spent decades teaching her people that strength could include gentleness. The Solani drifted through the chamber in their new ships, vessels they had designed and built themselves, using the knowledge Rosa Martinez had given them. Ambassador Alawan was still alive, her light dimmer now, but still beautiful. She had witnessed the transformation, and still, sometimes wept tears of joy when she saw what her people had become. Dozens of other species filled the remaining seats. Species that had been isolated for millennia now traded freely with their neighbors. Species that had been locked out of interstellar commerce now owned their own fleets. Species that had been subjects were now partners. Even the Velthari were present. Their delegation was smaller than it had once been. Ambassador Zithron was ancient now, his crystal body clouded with age. But he had come. He had watched his empire fade and had, in his final years, begun to understand why. The human ambassador rose from her seat and walked to the central platform. Her name was Catherine Price, and she was the great-granddaughter of Daniel Hayes. She had grown up hearing stories of first contact, of the plague on Varoth Prime, of the children rescued from the Kreth War. of the economic transformation at UnityHub.she was young by galactic standards, barely 50 years old, but she carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who knew exactly who she was and what she represented. 100 years, she began, her voice carrying through the vast chamber. In that time, my people have been called many things. We have been called naive. We have been called foolish. We have been called weak. We have been told that our kindness would be exploited, that our generosity would be our downfall, that the galaxy would eventually teach us the cruelty that governs all things. She paused, looking around at the assembled species, and yet here we stand, not as conquerors, not as rulers, not as masters of an empire built on exploitation and fear. We stand here as partners, as friends, as family. She activated a holographic display. Images appeared in the air above her. Scenes from a century of human history in the galaxy. Human doctors treating Virati plague victims, holding their hands through the worst of the disease. Human volunteers carrying Kreth larvae to safety through the wreckage of war. Human engineers teaching Solani to build their first independent ships. Human teachers opening schools on worlds that had never known education. Human farmers sharing agricultural techniques that ended famines on a dozen planets. We did not conquer this galaxy with weapons, Catherine continued. We did not dominate through military force or economic manipulation. We transformed this galaxy through something far more powerful than any fleet or any army. She let the word hang in the air for a moment. Kindness. Kthrak the Kreth rose to speak. Her translator converted her clicks and growls into the standard galactic language, but her voice carried its own power. I was abandoned, she said. My own people left me to die on a ruined world. I was days from death when the human ship arrived. A woman named Linda Park picked me up and held me. She told me I was safe. She called me Little One, though she knew nothing about my species. Her voice cracked slightly. I am Kreth by blood, but I am human by heart. They taught me that strength is not only the ability to destroy, true strength is the courage to protect. True power is the will to help those who cannot help themselves. I've spent my life teaching my people these lessons, and I have watched my civilization transform because of them. The ancient Virati matriarch spoke next. Her voice was weak with age, but every word carried weight. We were dying, she said. The plague was spreading, and the galaxy watched. They debated and calculated and determined that helping us offered no benefit. Then the humans came. They asked for nothing. They expected nothing. They simply helped. She turned her faded eyes toward Catherine. Your grandmother held my hand while the cure took effect. She sang me songs from your home world to help me sleep. I asked her why she had come so far to help strangers. Do you know what she said? Catherine shook her head. She said that there were no strangers, only friends she had not met yet. One by one, representatives rose to share their stories. The Solani spoke of the freedom of building their own ships, of traveling the stars without depending on others. Minor species spoke of fair trade and economic opportunity that had seemed impossible a century ago. Former Velthari client states spoke of liberation without violence, of chains removed without warfare. Finally, Ambassador Zithrin rose. The chamber fell silent. Everyone knew what the Velthari had lost to human influence. Their economic empire was gone. Their political dominance had faded. Many expected bitterness, perhaps even a call for retribution. Zithrin moved slowly to the central platform. His crystal body was dim, and he seemed fragile in a way that would have been unthinkable in his younger years. I have lived for 500 years, he said. I have seen empires rise and fall. I have watched species destroy themselves through greed and hatred. I built a system designed to ensure Velthari dominance forever, and I watched humans dismantle it with nothing but kindness. He turned to face Catherine. I spent most of my life believing that power was the only currency that mattered. I believed that kindness was weakness, that generosity was foolishness, that mercy was a failure of strength. I believed these things because everyone around me believed them. They seemed obviously true. He paused. I was wrong. A murmur ran through the chamber. Humans are not weak, Zithrin continued. They are the strongest species I've ever encountered, not because of their weapons or their technology, but because of their capacity for love. They see suffering, and they respond with help. They see hatred, and they respond with patience. They see enemies, and they see potential friends. Straightened his aged body as much as he could. The Velthari Empire feared many things. We feared invasion. We feared economic collapse. We feared military defeat, but we never feared kindness. We did not know that kindness could be a weapon. We did not understand that love could be an army. We did not realize that mercy could conquer more surely than any fleet. He bowed, a gesture of respect that Velthari rarely performed. Humans are terrifying, he said. Not because they can destroy, but because they can heal. Not because they can conquer, but because they can forgive. They are most terrifying at their kindest, because kindness is a power against which there is no defense. You cannot fight someone who only wants to help you. You cannot defeat someone who responds to your hatred with love. The chamber erupted in sound. Applause and song, and clicking and humming and whistling. A chorus of 100 species united in a way that had never happened before in 10,000. Years of galactic history, Catherine waited for the noise to fade. Then she stepped forward, her eyes bright with tears. "We do not want to be terrifying," she said softly. "We only want to be helpful. We want to be good neighbors. We want a galaxy where no one is alone, where no child is abandoned, where no species is exploited or forgotten." She extended her hand. The same gesture her great-grandfather had made a century ago. "We came in peace," she said. "Will you continue to walk with us?" And one by one, every species in the chamber rose. They reached out toward her, toward each other, toward a future that none of them had dared to imagine 100 years ago. The Virati touched scales with the Kreth. The Silani merged their light with species who had never known their song. The Velthari, ancient enemies of so many, found themselves welcomed into embraces they did not know they needed. And in the center of it all stood the humans, exactly where they had always wanted to be, not at the top, not in command, not ruling over subjects or extracting tribute from the weak, just part of the family. The galaxy had learned a truth that had been forgotten for 10,000 years. The most powerful force in the universe was not hatred. It was not fear. It was not violence or greed or domination. It was love, and humans, for all their flaws and failures and shortcomings, had reminded the galaxy of that truth. They had conquered not through war, but through kindness. They had transformed not through force, but through compassion. They had united not through fear, but through hope. The stars looked down on the Senate chamber as they had for millennia, but something had changed. The cold distances between worlds seemed a little warmer. The vast emptiness of space seemed a little less lonely, because for the first time in recorded history, the galaxy was no longer a collection of competing species. It was a community. It was a family, and it had just begun to understand what it could become.